Welcome to the chapters 22, 12, and 14 unit. So we're going to be focused on nuclear energy, radiation, and waves. These will be the main topics or concepts that will be viewed in this video. As always, make sure you have taken notes on the side, and any questions that you have, please let me know and we can talk about it in class. So we're going to describe nuclear reactions, particularly fusion and fission. What are the differences and what are the results of them? We've been talking about chemical reactions in our traditional chemistry, which is very, very different than nuclear reactions or nuclear chemistry. So we'll be comparing the regular chemistry that we've been talking about and nuclear. First, the parts of the atom that are involved, what's needed to start the reaction, what's the outcome of the reaction, and is energy absorbed or released. We'll be touching again on isotopes, what they are, examples, learning something new called half-life, and talking about radioactive decay, radioisotopes and uses in medical treatment, and carbon dating, back from earth science, and how do we know how old things are. So nuclear reactions. What we're really looking at is the nucleus of the atom, and we know that opposites attract, electromagnetic force, so a positive and negative will attract. So a positive and a positive should repel each other. But there's something called the strong nuclear force, or strong force, that actually binds these positives together. And if they get pushed away from each other a little bit, then it makes this nucleus unstable. And when we say the nucleus is unstable, it tends to be radioactive. So the two types of nuclear reactions we'll talk about is fusion. Think union, unite. So things are combining together. And fission, think about the S. Fission has two S's and they split apart. So unite, split. So we'll start with fusion. So fusion, again, something's coming together. So when we look at a normal hydrogen, it just has a proton, electron, and does not have a neutron. But with fusion, we're talking about the isotopes, which means they have these extra white neutrons. So they're still hydrogen, but they're a little bit heavier, heavy hydrogen. So what's happening is we're joining two of these nuclei, smaller masses, to create larger atoms, helium, and a lot of energy. Again, this powers the sun. We would like to make fusion reactors on Earth. The problem is the temperatures have to exceed around 1,000,000 degrees. So we have to have plasma. So this is thermonuclear reaction. So fission, remember double S's, we're splitting apart. And so we're breaking the nucleus of an atom. So it's a larger atom. Usually it's U for uranium. So it has 92 protons, 92 electrons, and if you do the math, 238 minus 92 will give you the number of neutrons. We can also use plutonium, which has atomic mass of 94. So these are large radioactive material. This is what powers nuclear weapons and nuclear reactors. So we use a neutron bullet. So just a neutron hits it and essentially breaks it into two smaller nuclei. And then it also produces 2 to 3 of these neutron bullets, which hit more of these nuclei. And if there's enough, we call it critical mass. We can have a chain reaction. So this slide, we can even pause it, and I want you to review this. This is important. We've been talking about chemical reactions, and now we're going to switch a little bit now to nuclear reactions. So chemical reactions, we're always looking at the outermost electrons, those valence electrons. And remember, we make chemical bonds from sharing, nonmetal and nonmetal, or a transfer from a metal to a nonmetal. And then we have that transfer, positive and negative, so we have that ionic bond. So atoms are brought close together, sometimes with high temperature, pressure. We use that catalyst, like platinum, and only in that one example we have yeast making oxygen. Or we can increase the concentration of the reactants, more ingredients. So atoms, again, form ionic, metal and nonmetal, or covalent. Two nonmetals sharing valence electrons. So how much energy is absorbed or released? Very small amount. So what are some examples? Burning fossil fuels, gasoline, charcoal, digesting your food, house cleaning, making cake, medicines, chemicals. And nuclear chemistry sometimes actually even falls into the physics category. So now we're talking about the protons and neutrons just in the nucleus of the atom. So we're looking at a lot of high temperatures, sometimes up to 1,000,000 degrees, and we're bombarding with high-speed particles those neutron bullets. So the number of protons and neutrons in an atom usually change. So there's huge amounts of energy. We're talking again about nuclear power plants producing electricity for 3 years or more just with some uranium rods. We're talking about the powering the sun for a couple billion years, many billions of years. So nuclear energy, we're thinking about X-rays, treating cancer, radiating food to sterilize it from viruses and bacteria. Again, generating heat and light from the stars, not just our own. Maybe an oversimplified explanation of fusion and fission. So again, fusion, you unite, you're taking two hydrogens together, making something a little bigger like helium. And then fission, something big like uranium or plutonium, and splitting in half. So what's the big difference between these two as far as energy, radioactive waste? Fission, this is what powers nuclear power plants, nuclear subs, it's highly reactive substance, and uranium, plutonium releases less energy compared to fusion. And this radioactive material we have to store for 200,000 years in barrels and in water, in pools. And the question is, are those barrels going to last 200,000 years? No, probably not. So fusion, so we just use hydrogen. So where do we have hydrogen? Oh yeah, H2O. And 70% of the Earth is covered by water. So it's a pretty readily accessible fuel, highly abundant, produces a lot less radioactive waste. Some textbooks say there's none, but there's a little bit, and releases a lot of energy. So, define radioactivity. Now we're looking at the nucleus of an atom, and the nucleus is unstable. Tends to have more neutrons or less, but usually more neutrons, which pushes those protons a little too far, and that strong force can't keep it all together. So, the nucleus is trying to release energy to become stable, because we all want to be stable in the end. So it can release some particles as alpha rays or alpha particles. We can also release a beta ray or a beta particle, and also a lot of energy can be released by gamma rays. So there's no particles, but it's a lot of energy. So you can either be waves, rays, or a photon, like a particle. And the gamma rays are the ones that can harm you. These are very, very deadly. So we have been talking about isotopes for quite some time, but it's easy to get isotopes somehow confused with ions. So it's the same number of protons, so it's the same element, but it has a different number of neutrons. So we have our classic carbon-12. So this 12 is the atomic mass. So our normal or classic carbon has 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons. So this atomic mass is just the protons and neutrons added together. What's inside the nucleus? So how is that different than carbon-14? So it's the same as carbon-12, has 6 protons, so 6 protons. The protons tell you the number, or the element, which is carbon. 6 electrons, so it's neutral. But it has 2 more neutrons. Doesn't seem like a big deal, right? Just the nucleus is a little bit more heavy, more dense. But it makes this isotope radioactive. I'll warn you, this is kind of complex until you get it, then it's easy, and then until you get it, it kind of is challenging. So the half-life of a radioactive element. So we're talking about radioactive decay. So each element has a fixed rate of decay. So the amount of time it takes for half of the atoms that are radioactive to decay and not be radioactive. So radioactive decay happens when the nucleus is unstable and it's trying to undergo this reaction to become more stable. So like the previous slide, it's releasing the alpha, beta, and gamma rays. It's releasing energy and particles to become stable. So if we have 1,000 grams of a radioactive material and the half-life is 100 years, so that means in 100 years half of the 1,000 grams will be radioactive and the other half will be inert or not radioactive. So the question is, after 400 years, how much of the original 1,000 grams will be radioactive? Pause the video and figure it out. Right, 62.5 grams. So you start with 1,000, and after 100 years you have 500 that's still radioactive. You have 500 grams that's radioactive, and after 100 years, how much is left? 250. After another 100 years, you have 125 grams that are radioactive. And after another 100 years, you have half of that, so you have 62.5 grams left. After 400 years, 62.5 grams of the original 1,000 grams. Only this is still radioactive. Alright, try another one. Let's say the half-life of a different radioactive element is 20 years. So that means in 20 years you'll have half of the original material will be radioactive. So you have 200 grams to start off with, and again, in 20 years you'll have half that's still radioactive. So the question is, how much is still going to be radioactive of the original material after 60 years? I'll give you the answer in class. So we have radioactive isotopes. So we have radiation that is helping us diagnose medical problems. Have you ever been to the ER or gone to a doctor's appointment at the hospital and they have you drink some icky sticky stuff? Probably tastes bad. Or they injected it into your blood. So it's a tracer. So this thing is radioactive. And then it depends on where they're looking for. It might be looking through your brain, looking for blood flow in your stomach. And they're looking for just tracing it so the machine can actually see the fluorescence of the reactivity, like the glow of it, and can trace blood flow and different reactions in the brain. So the question is, they're giving you something radioactive. Well, isn't that bad? So it's a very, very short half-life. So all the radiation, all that material will break down within a few hours. So there won't be any long-term effect. Did you ever wonder how they know how old a mummy is, or some dinosaur bones, or an old tree without coring it? So they use carbon-14, sometimes commonly known as carbon dating. So it's a radioactive isotope of carbon. It's in the upper atmosphere, and it circles down and plants absorb it through photosynthesis. And then animals eat them, and then they have the carbon-14 in it. And then once these plants or animals die, or you can actually even test it while they're alive, they begin to break down. So when we did those half-life problems, carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years. So they figure that this mummy would have about, based on the size of the skeleton and the bone structure, about 100 grams. But when they measure it, they only have 55 grams of carbon-14 that's still radioactive. So the mummy should be right around 5,000 years old. And we can detect fossils up to about 50,000 years old. If they're older than that, we can use different isotopes of potassium and uranium. So when you take a year-long chemistry class, you'll really get into this alpha and beta and gamma particles, which are pretty interesting, but can also be quite confusing. So we won't get into it too much this year. Pause the video, make sure you can explain this information to somebody else and that you know it. Jot down any questions that you have and ask me in class. Thank you very much.